A murderous ghost with a hook for a hand causes terror in the Chicago projects. It's our Halloween spooktacular episode, and we're discussing how many times saying a supernatural killer's name is too many, how much a bee sting is worth, and this movie's random connection to Lost. Then we find out if Candyman stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a spooktacular episode of The Test of Time. My name is Alan Noah, and joining me is a guy who's always there when I call his name 5 times in a mirror, James Brief.
Hello, Alan. I'm very excited for today. It's a movie I'd never seen before, Candyman.
I hadn't seen this one either. This was a movie that Courtney was telling me we should watch and we should do on the podcast. She had watched it when she was a kid. She remembered it being scary, and so we like watching scary movies with our daughter. She's very into horror, and this was a movie that we watched with her for Halloween.
Yeah, I remember the film coming out, and I thought it was kind of a came and went film, but then there was a sequel, and then I remember people talking about it for years and years, and then there was this Jordan Peele-produced remake a few years ago.
No, that was also a sequel. There were 2 sequels in the 90s. The 2021 movie, it was directed by Nia DaCosta. Jordan Peele produced it. Yeah, that's also a direct sequel to the first movie.
Oh, okay. Because I think Tony Todd was in that one, right?
Yeah, I might be mispronouncing his name, but Yahya Abdul-Mateen II was cast, and I thought that he was cast as Candyman. He's not. He's Anthony, the baby in the first movie. It's him grown up. Yeah. And Tony Todd is Candyman again. Virginia Madsen, I think, is maybe in it, or like her voice is in it, or pictures or something. Vanessa Williams is back as Anthony's mom. It is a direct sequel to the first movie.
Interesting.
Yeah. So why don't you tell our listeners what Candyman's all about for anyone who hasn't seen it?
Candyman is a movie about a graduate student named Helen Lyle. She's investigating the urban legend called Candyman, a vengeful spirit that's said to appear if his name is spoken 5 times into a mirror. Helen eventually learns the story behind the Candyman. He was a black artist who was murdered in the 19th century by a lynch mob for the crime of loving a white woman. His hand was sawed off and replaced with a hook. He was smothered in honey and stung to death by a swarm of angry bees. His corpse was then burned on the site that would later become the Cabrini Green Projects, a Chicago housing project. As Helen digs deeper, she discovers unsettling links between the myth and real murders, only to find herself entangled in the supernatural vengeance she sought to debunk. When the Candyman suspects that people no longer believe him, he decides to murder more to prove his existence. In the end, Helen defeats the Candyman and saves the baby that he planned to kill.
Right. So it's a happy ending for the baby, because then he could go on to be in the sequel 30 years later.
That's right.
I assume when this movie came out, it was a hit because there were sequels.
Well, yeah, obviously the film has endured, but the film was actually a hit from the beginning. It opened on October 16th, 1992. It had under a $10 million budget. I've seen between $8 and $9 million. It opened at number 4 with $5 million, on its way to $25.7 million. So certainly was a profitable film, and it's that classic idea that a horror film, you don't need big stars, you need a premise, and that's what people like. They love this idea of, saying, what is it, Bloody Mary or something in the mirror, or whatever, and some spook will come and kill you.
Exactly. And so this movie was based on a Clive Barker story, a short story called The Forbidden. That took place in Liverpool, and it didn't have the racial elements that are in the movie. The short story is kind of bare bones. It's just about saying Candyman 5 times in a mirror. Actually, I think I read somewhere that it was 15 times or something, which is way too many times. Honestly, I was surprised when we started watching the movie and you have to say it 5 times. I was like, no, it should be 3. 5 is too many. 15 is way, way too many.
I actually thought they said 3 in the first scene, and the man who's like flirting with the woman says it 3 times, or he actually says it 4 times, and she's like, "Oh, no one ever made it to 4."
No, it's no one ever makes it to 5. Everyone stops at 4. That's the joke.
And then she says it the last time.
Right.
I was thinking at first, oh, I guess maybe he has to be activated, or like the spell book hasn't been made yet, or something like that. And I just missed it. And then when she said it a 5th time and he kills her, I just kind of retroactively in my head correctly figured, oh, okay, it must have been 5 times. Because I thought it was 3. Because I think that's the Bloody Mary thing.
3 makes more sense.
Yeah.
There's a rule of 3s. There's not a rule of 5s. That was weird. But this story is based on this short story. It's also based on a real life murder of this woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy. I went down a rabbit hole, and this story is so awful. I won't tell the whole story, but the short version is that this woman was killed in the Abbott Homes housing project in Chicago. The person who killed her broke into her apartment by going through the medicine cabinet. And that method of entry is different, and so it made a little bit of news, but not that much, because there were so many murders in the housing projects in the 80s. And they talk about that in a movie, that these places were just awful, dangerous, terrible places. And it made a little bit of news because one journalist was investigating because the woman called 911 and the 911 operator didn't really help her very much. And that was kind of like this simmering scandal about 911 operators not helping people in Chicago that didn't make any news until a white woman was killed and she wasn't helped by 911. And then there was an investigation, and then they looked into it, and then they made all of these changes, which also is in the movie Candyman. Helen says there was an arrest when she's attacked, a white woman, and all these black people are being killed left and right. Nobody cares. It's only when a white woman's attacked that the cops spring into action, which unfortunately is true. It was true then. That is a thing that unfortunately stands the test of time. But the woman in real life who was killed, her name was Ruthie Mae McCoy. The woman in this movie who's killed, her name is Ruthie. And then the neighbor, Anne Marie, that Helen is talking to, her last name is McCoy. So it was very clearly pulled from this real life story.
The racial elements of the story were unexpected to me. I really didn't know that there was so much racial undertones to the story. And I thought actually that the subplot, that they thought that perhaps someone was using the idea of the urban legend to do real murders. I thought that that's actually kind of a brilliant plot to spook people, and also get away with murders. Maybe the people in the neighborhood themselves, they were convinced it was a supernatural entity themselves. So I thought it was an intriguing story.
The thing about the real guy who's pretending to be Candyman and then he's caught, I kind of didn't really get that, because they say that he was wanted for those other murders. So presumably he killed Ruthie, the old lady who died by someone coming through the medicine cabinet. Okay, sure. Why would he kill an old lady? I don't know, money, I guess, right? But then he also castrated this kid. The other boy who's telling Helen the story uses the R word, but why would this guy kill a developmentally disabled child in a bathroom? Because he's evil? I don't know. I just don't understand what the motivation would be for doing something like that.
I can only imagine that it's from a screenplay point of view. This is the hurting a dog, hurting a child. Like, this just immediately establishes this is another level of evil.
Sure. I was just a little disappointed by the way that story element just kind of wrapped up neatly. I feel like there should have been something about, well, yeah, this guy, he's wanted for a couple murders, but there are maybe still some unexplained murders. Because that story in the very beginning that we hear with the babysitter, the boyfriend only gets to 4, did that really happen, or is that just urban legend?
Right.
Because it wouldn't be this real life murderer. Would he have gotten there and killed this random douchebag? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that was supposed to be the real Candyman. Like once we get into the story of the supernatural Candyman, he lives, quote unquote, I mean, he's dead, but he kind of lives in Cabrini Green. And so he's killing the people who live in Cabrini Green, and that's black people. Okay, sure, he's a Freddy Krueger type ghost supernatural killer. Given his story about how he was killed by a lynch mob, you would think that he wouldn't want to kill the poor residents of the Chicago housing projects. He'd want to go after the descendants of the rich white assholes who killed him.
You know, the background of Freddy Krueger is that he was a horrible man in real life. I think he like molested the kids, and then the parents of those children burned him to death. So he just became vengeful and said, I'm gonna kill all your children when you can't protect them in your dreams, and he's still evil.
Right.
But I had the same confusion. I was like, wait, this was generally a good person in life, and his biggest crime was that he was a black man who fell in love with a white woman
and got her pregnant.
And this was the kind of story based on these horrible, like Emmett Till kind of stories where people didn't want any mixing of any of the races, so he's murdered. Then the Emmett Till story becomes a story for people of all races remember how horrible this is. But you're right, I didn't quite understand what is the motivation. Did he harm a child? Or even if the people believe he castrated a child, why is this wronged, murdered person killing children? And even in the end, I was wondering, what's the deal with this baby? The baby, at first we thought, oh, maybe the baby's murdered when we can't find this baby in the crib. And then when I realized the baby's alive, I'm like, oh, okay, good. Candyman's not really evil. He's not really going to kill a baby. But he really was going to kill a baby.
Yeah.
I was wondering, why is Candyman so vengeful against the people in this housing complex? I was confused by that.
I think there's a lot that's confusing, honestly. Also, why is he called Candyman? Helen finds the candy that's kind of left out by the mural as sort of an offering. She finds like a razor blade in one of the pieces of candy. That kind of ties in with the whole urban legend thing. But why is he called the Candyman? It seems like maybe they would have called him Bee Man or Honey Man based on the story. Yes, there's sugar in honey and there's sugar in candy, but that part didn't make any sense. And then also, if the only way to summon him is to say his name 5 times in a mirror, cool, just don't do that. And then he never comes and kills anyone. So, I mean, it seems like an easier thing to avoid, as opposed to kind of like the Freddy Krueger thing where, yeah, he's just going to go after the kids of the people who wronged him. You can't stop it. You can't protect yourself. He's coming for you, and that's terrifying. Candyman is kind of not terrifying if all you have to do is just not summon him.
You know, that is actually one thing I want to say about this film. I don't think too much of this film is very scary.
Because he has to be summoned, you mean?
No, I just mean the kind of, it's just, you know, hook and kill. I don't particularly find that scary. However, there's one scene in particular, probably the most famous scene in the film, because it was kind of the only scene I'd kind of vaguely heard of, which is the bee scene, where bees are coming out of the Candyman's mouth, and it's maybe an urban legend, maybe not, that Tony Todd was stung like 26 times, and he may or may not have been promised $1,000 per bee sting.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's in dispute.
Either way, I don't know if $23,000 pre-taxes, pre your age is getting a cut of that. And Badger and Uncle Sam. And
well, it depends on who made the deal.
Right, and also you have a hospital bill when you get stung 26 times.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure that's worth it. Maybe $10,000, $260,000, maybe. That might be worth it.
Sure.
I've never been particularly scared of bees because I generally find bumblebees, like, leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. I don't swat them away.
But bumblebees are different from like hornets that will come after you and sting you.
Right. Were these hornets or bumblebees? I don't think they put hornets in his mouth. But either way, it was still scary when you see the stuff coming out of the mouth. That was a cool scene. I thought that was a cool visual.
It is memorable. It is scary. Also, though, it could have been a lot scarier. Tony Todd said that they made that scene longer and it was cut down a lot because Candyman has the bees in his mouth, and then he kisses Helen and puts the bees in her mouth. Virginia Madsen was allergic to bee stings, and there were EMTs like on standby. Yeah, and the bees were specially bred to be very young, so that they can't really sting that hard, but they can still sting, kind of, I guess. But the bees were transferred from Candyman's mouth to Helen's mouth in the kiss. You don't really see the kiss.
Right.
The camera's kind of behind Tony Todd's head. Apparently, according to Tony Todd, that scene was cut way, way down because somebody somewhere was worried about the interracial romance. They talk about it. That's a main plot point, but they didn't want to show it. They didn't want to make it explicit. The kiss had to be kind of obscured, and they didn't want there to be too much, which is, one, racist, but two, I think it hurts the movie because it makes that scary scene less scary. And honestly, I think the romance, quote unquote, between Candyman and Helen is really interesting because after that scene, she sees a mural that has her picture on it and it says, "It was always you, Helen," or something like that. So it's implied that Helen is the reincarnation of the woman that Candyman loved and impregnated all those decades, a century earlier. The way that Candyman talks to her, it is seductive. He tells her to be my victim. Like he's asking her, he wants her to willingly come with him. We see Candyman gut some people. He doesn't give a shit. He just sticks his hook hand in them and, slices them up. But with Helen, he wants her to be involved. Like, he wants her to want it,
There is something there. I was 99% sure that was there. I actually wish that the movie had given me a little bit more. Like, it wouldn't have hurt to see a flashback of Virginia Madsen as the woman back then.
There was going to be a prequel made after the success of this movie that was going to be about Candyman and Helen in the 1800s and, their romance, but that was also scrapped because of the fear of showing an interracial romance. So that didn't happen.
That would have been interesting because in that film, you would have had social commentary of the time. They're in love with each other. They have this baby. He'll be killed. And then, of course, probably the last act of the film is him coming back in vengeance and killing all those white people. And, maybe something on the lines of, "I will remain here forever," leading into the 1990s film. But that seems to make a little more sense for what we were looking for, like get revenge on the people that killed you, as opposed to you killed me for loving this white woman, and now I'm going to kill all the other black people in this neighborhood who happen to live on the grounds of where you killed me. He's killing the wrong people and babies.
Oh, absolutely. He's killing the people who live in the Chicago housing projects. Again, the people who lived in the Chicago housing projects, they had enough to deal with. That's true in real life. It's true in the movie. Cabrini Green no longer stands. It was demolished. It was a real place. They're using the real name of an actual housing project. It was a different housing project where the real Ruthie Mae McCoy was killed. But those were awful, awful, horrible places built with the best of intentions to give low-income people a place to live in Chicago. The movie kind of touches on that when Helen is talking about how her apartment building was the same exact design as the housing projects, but the difference was that her building was too close to the nice neighborhood. Cabrini Green was on the other side of the L, I think, the train. So there was a dividing line between the haves and the have-nots. And her apartment building same construction, same design. They just put some nicer plaster over the walls and then quadrupled, quintupled, or more the rent. And now it's for the rich white folks. That kind of shit happens. It's horrific. That's how she discovers the whole medicine cabinet thing, because it's true in her apartment, so it's got to be true in the projects. But the way that the movie is kind of tackling these bigger picture racial issues, real world issues of the time, it's notable that the movie's director, Bernard Rose, was a white guy, but a white guy who was very concerned about making sure his movie wasn't racist. I think he showed either the finished movie or a script to people at the NAACP and said, hey, can you just take a look at this? Is this racist? Am I doing anything wrong? Should I change things? And apparently the people who reviewed it said, no, it's fine. You're handling it with respect. He was like, I just don't know. Is it racist to make the killer black? And they said, well, it would maybe even be racist to assume that no Freddy Krueger-like character could ever be black. Why can't he be black? So he felt like he had gotten some permission and had gotten a blessing to do it. The movie was also then later criticized by some people who said that it did play into some stereotypical tropes, which I think is fair. There is some of that, but he did try. He was definitely trying to make a movie that was shining a light on racism in a way that would be respectful and not exploitative. And this is completely neither here nor there, but his name is Bernard Rose, and that just made me chuckle because we just finished rewatching Lost. They were my favorite couple on Lost. Rose and Bernard.
The interracial couple.
Yeah, and so Bernard Rose directed this movie, and there's an interracial couple, and I don't know. It's worth mentioning on a podcast about movies, I guess.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
There's the climax where Candyman and Helen are in this big junkyard pile because she's been lured there by the cry of a crying baby. Mm-hmm. And then there's this little black boy that's looking at the pile, and Helen happened to have Candyman's hook at the time. She's trying to use it to kind of spelunk her way up the garbage pile, and he sees the hook, this little boy, and goes, oh, okay, it's Candyman. And so matter of fact, he just goes, all right, let's get the boys, and everyone kind of gets together, and it's like, it's not, let's call the police, because it's obvious the police aren't going to do anything. Right. We have to take care of this ourselves. And just about a dozen people, like, they have gasoline, and they just set fire to this pile, and they're going to get rid of the Candyman. They know that he's a menace to them. I like that they get together and try to kill the Candyman.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're wrongly almost killing a baby, and they do kill Helen.
Right.
Then again, I think since Candyman was in the middle of the pile holding Helen back, I don't think any of this would have happened if he wasn't involved. So it was all set up to the climax. The problem I have with the climax, though, is that the Candyman seems to be, obviously, since he's 100-something years old, and Tony Todd as an actor, as a young guy in this film, this is obviously supposed to be his old self who hasn't aged in 100 years. He, I thought, had some kind of Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees supernatural ability. I was a little bit disappointed when the climax of the film, the way that Helen escapes from him, is she literally stabs him.
Right.
And I was like, wait, what? You could have just stabbed him at any time? The rules are just a little bit inconsistent.
Oh, I think they're very inconsistent. He's invisible. When he comes to her, when she's in the psych ward, she sees him. He's floating above her. She's screaming. Then later they see the footage and he's not there. But also he can appear and physically stab someone, and then he goes through the window when he kills the psychiatrist. But then also when she finds him on the altar, he's sleeping. So like, wait, he's like a guy who needs naps, but he's also an invisible ghost, but also he can be stabbed, but also his chest is filled with bees. So is he corporeal? Is he physical? Is he invisible? It does change a lot from scene to scene.
And sometimes he's summoned by saying Candyman 5 times, and other times he just appears.
Yes, but in the beginning, Helen summons him. She says his name 5 times, and he doesn't appear until, I don't know, maybe, half an hour or so later in the movie when he shows up in that parking garage. So she does summon him, and so now he has been summoned by her so he can show up whenever, maybe?
Oh, okay. Maybe it's the initial summoning. Maybe it's like the Aladdin. First you have to rub the lamp, and then he's kind of just around until you get your 3 wishes. So, okay, that's fair.
But also, to your point, it's inconsistent because sometimes you say his name 5 times, and then he shows up, stabby, stabby, and disappears. So it's not a consistent thing throughout the movie. When he shows up and what he does when he's there, it definitely changes. You could argue that the reason he's doing what he's doing with Helen is he's trying to bring her in. So that's why he has it look like she killed Anne-Marie's dog and kidnaps the baby. That's why he kills her friend, her research partner, and makes it look like it was Helen because he's trying to frame her. By the way, the actress who plays Bernadette, Helen's friend and co-researcher, she's played by Cassie Lemons, who just the year before this movie in 1991 was also the investigator's friend in Silence of the Lambs. I only know that because we also just watched Silence of the Lambs as one of our spooky movies for October. Same kind of thing. She was doing, similar kind of role, the investigator's friend.
I just kept thinking about, there's one hilarious South Park episode where there's a little gag that if you say the name Biggie Smalls, the Notorious B.I.G., if you say his name in a mirror 3 times, he'll appear.
Right.
And then there's a part in the South Park episode where he made it all the way to like Los Angeles, but then someone back in South Park says his name and he's summoned back to Colorado and he's like, damn it, get me back to L.A. And I just kept thinking, wouldn't it be funny if the way that you save Helen is if some random person anywhere in the world says Candyman 5 times? It's going to pull him away from this area.
Oh, interesting.
Because of the loophole in the rules of the say his name multiple times. So I just kept thinking that and maybe give myself a little chuckle.
Got it. Also, just it's worth mentioning Helen's husband, Trevor, who is the worst, played by Xander Berkeley, character actor, who is just very, very clearly from the first scene bagging his young student. Helen seems to suspect it, and then it's confirmed later on. He's a piece of shit because he's cheating on his wife. Also, though, she's doing a study on urban legends, and he knows that. He promises he's not going to lecture about urban legends in his class, and she confronts him about it, and he's like, no, that's part of my curriculum that I have to teach. It's like, wait, what's your curriculum? What class is this that you have to teach a lecture on urban legends when it kind of seems like, nah, you don't?
Yeah, I did think that this professor character was going to be a little more interesting than he was, but in the end, he was kind of more of a 2-dimensional character.
Fair.
I thought he was going to contribute more to the story before his ultimate demise, but no.
Well, no, it's his friend at dinner. He's the guy who has all of the insight.
Right.
That cocky asshole. And it's very weird because Helen shows up at dinner and is like, we're going to bury you because of this unbelievable project I'm doing on Candyman. And he's like, yeah, I wrote a paper on Candyman. And then Helen's like, oh, I actually don't know anything about Candyman. Can you please explain to me who he is and what you learned in your paper? Like, well, wait, what? First off, why do you want to quote unquote bury him with your thesis paper? I don't think that's usually how it works. Like if you have a thesis, you want other academics to be interested in it and read it and think, oh, that's a wonderful thesis. Not, oh man, that thesis destroyed my thesis or hurt me in some way. But also, yeah, if you're going to do a thesis on Candyman, maybe read what other professors have written about Candyman, especially other professors that that's like, your husband's friend.
I mean, how many published papers can exist on Candyman? And she somehow missed the one that is like the most recent one.
Right.
I know back then they didn't have like a computer search, but they had like a card catalog or, something they had back then that would show all what the journals and whatever for that month it was in. But I just think it's so funny that she's never heard of this guy who knows all about Candyman, and she doesn't know anything about Candyman.
No, 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 no. And we do see her doing some research on microfiche, which while we were watching the movie with our daughter, Courtney and I had to pause and say, this is how mom and dad used to look things up way back in the 90s. But James, let me ask you about Candyman. Do you think that Candyman stands the test of time?
All right. Well, this film was very different than what I thought it was going to be. I didn't really know anything about the mythology of it. I kind of thought it was going to be a slasher film. I was surprised by the amount of thought that was put into the film. I really liked the acting in the film. I thought all the principal characters were very good. I thought the children in the film were good, and that's always a difficult thing to have a good child actor. The mythology was really interesting. You know, he was killed and wrongfully killed, and it's a powerful reason for vengeance and to come back and to kill the people that had taken away his love. And unfortunately, I have the same problem that we discussed earlier. He seems to be terrorizing these poor people in this housing neighborhood. At first, I was kind of sympathetic to Candyman, and then I was thinking, no, he's just kind of a straight-up murderer. He really did try to kill a baby at the end, and there were a lot of elements in this film that I really liked. The film, it just didn't really come together for me. So for me, I'm going to say it doesn't stand the test of time. Its biggest crime is that it just wasn't that scary. What about you? Do you think that the original Candyman stands the test of time?
I got to be honest with you. I was really on the fence about this movie because, like you're saying, I think this movie is just jam-packed with really, really interesting ideas. It's a movie about race and class and racial differences and how these buildings were set up and kind of how they were destined to be these breeding grounds for violence and tragedy. And it begins in an innocuous way of, oh, it's just this urban legend. And then as it's peeling the layers back, like, wow, there's a lot to this story. And they're really commenting on a lot of different things here that are real and relevant and unfortunately stand the test of time, about how there are these divides in many places, Chicago specifically. I like the romance aspect of it. I was even kind of thinking about Helen as the protagonist. She's kind of an asshole. She goes into this building. She's just trying to get her thesis done. Bernadette, her friend, is like, why are you dressed like a cop? And she's like, I don't know. But then, no, she did want to dress like a cop because she figures that if she's dressed like a cop, then people will answer her questions and take her seriously and give her the answers that she wants. Then she kind of stops doing this thesis about urban legends and she's basically doing a murder investigation on her own. And that doesn't seem like a thing a grad student should be doing, and trying to get information about this murder from her neighbor who's clearly traumatized by it. Then she bumps into this little kid and she's taunting the kid. Oh, well, if you're too scared, I guess you don't have to help me. Like, yo, that's a little kid living in the projects that you're just trying to extract information from. You're not going to protect this kid. If that guy who's called himself Candyman, if he'd attacked that kid, that's on her. She is putting that kid in harm's way. So, yeah, you know, you feel bad for her because she dies and because her husband's cheating on her. And, yeah, she's got problems, too. But, like, she's kind of a shitty character when you think about it. I do have a lot of problems with the movie. I think the story is not great. It feels, honestly, to me like a first draft of a script where there are just so many ideas that are so great. And someone needs to come in and say, I love all of what you're going for here. Now we need to do a pass to smooth it out, have it make more sense, have the logic be a bit more logical, have there be more consistency in what this guy can do, and let's just put these pieces together in a better way. So that, I think, does hurt the movie. I think that's kind of what you were saying with your criticisms of the movie. That was kind of leading me to say no, but I think I'm going to say that yes, the movie does stand the test of time because it is beloved. It really does have a special place in people's hearts. You know, the fact that there was a Lego sequel a couple of years ago, that doesn't necessarily mean anything because everything gets a Lego sequel nowadays. But I do feel like when you look on these lists of people's favorite horror movies, Candyman is on there. Candyman has endured as a character, saying the name in the mirror 5 times. People have heard of that. They know about the hook hand. Maybe they know about the bees. From a pop culture standpoint, I think that the character has endured. In part, that's helped because of the movie from a few years ago. But I'm going to say that this movie does stand the test of time. Kind of just barely because of all of its many problems, but I'm going to give it a yes. But that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we are going to be talking about The First Wives Club in honor of the late, great Diane Keaton. I'm guessing it's going to be very funny. I'm looking forward to seeing that movie. In the meantime, we want to hear your thoughts on Candyman. We want to hear if you've ever said his name 5 times in a mirror. Be honest. Don't lie. Let us know. We're at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Hey, you can even give us some suggestions for scary movies to do in the future. We tend to do them around Halloween. Maybe we can do some other scary movies other times of the year. Why not? Let us know what movies you think we should do. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.